The room was empty except for the low whir of the monitors and the faint smell of burnt coffee someone had abandoned hours ago. I was standing at my desk, blazer still on, laptop open, staring at a permission screen that shouldn't have existed. My name was there, my role was there, and next to it, revoked. Not paused, not limited, revoked. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, numb in a way that felt more like shock than fear. Outside my glass office, the rest of the floor hummed with ordinary motion chairs rolling, Slack pings bleeding through walls, someone laughing too loudly near the break room. Inside, my pulse thudded in my ears. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to feel the floor tilt under you without warning, stay with me. You'll understand why I couldn't look away from what came next. I refreshed the page. Same result. My access to our internal analytics environment gone. Not just the executive dashboard, but the underlying system I'd helped design when this company was nothing more than a pitch deck and insomnia. That kind of lockout didn't happen by accident. It required intent, planning, someone with enough authority to think they wouldn't get caught. I sat down slowly, the leather chair cold against the backs of my legs, and pulled up the secondary audit view most people forgot existed. We'd added it years ago after a client demanded extra compliance safeguards. It logged behavior most executives never thought about. Metadata trails, access signatures, the quiet footprints left behind when someone moved fast and assumed no one was watching. There it was, a pattern. Late-night entries clustered together, not random, not exploratory, purposeful. Files opened, mirrored, permissions adjusted, then reverted, clean enough to pass a surface check, sloppy enough to leave fingerprints underneath. My mouth went dry as I scrolled, the glow of the screen reflecting back at me like an accusation. This wasn't sabotage, it was preparation. I pulled up the investor data room next, heart ticking faster now. Documents had been viewed, exported, re-uploaded under slightly altered names. A revised projection deck, one I hadn't approved, sat time-stamped from well after midnight. The numbers were familiar, the assumptions weren't. Someone had been telling a story about my company that I hadn't signed off on. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder for later that morning, Series B strategy sync. The same round they'd told me I was getting too emotional about last week when I pushed back on valuation pressure. The same round currently penciled between 13.6 million and something much worse if control slipped. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the faint rattle of air vents overhead suddenly too loud. There was only one person who benefited from this kind of quiet maneuvering. One person charismatic enough to reassure everyone else while cutting me out of the room where decisions were being made. I looked back at the screen, at the access logs he didn't know I could see. And that was the moment I stopped wondering if I was paranoid and started asking how long he thought he could get away with it. He'd been leaning against the high table like he owned the room, one ankle crossed over the other, smiling at a cluster of founders who were hanging on his every word. I remember clocking the confidence before I clocked the resume. Charisma like that announces itself. It doesn't ask permission. We met at a regional tech conference, one of those hotel ballrooms that smelled like carpet cleaner and overbrewed coffee. I'd just finished a panel on scaling data infrastructure in regulated industries, my throat dry, my nerves buzzing from adrenaline. He waited until the crowd thinned before stepping forward, hand already out. "You're Alexis," he said. "The anomaly detection platform for healthcare systems, right?" I nodded, surprised. "That's me." "Your explanation of hybrid cloud failure modes?" He shook his head, impressed. "Best thing I heard all day. Most people don't actually understand what breaks first." That should have been my first clue. He knew just enough to sound indispensable. We grabbed coffee in the lobby, paper cups too hot to hold properly. He wore a Patagonia vest over a crisp button-down, an expensive watch peeking out when he gestured. He talked about scaling teams, about bringing order to chaos, about how founders needed someone who could translate vision into execution. Every sentence ended with a soft hook, a subtle invitation to trust him. "You're building something fragile right now," he said gently. "That's not an insult. It's just the stage you're in. Trust me, I've been there. Trust me." He said it like punctuation. I pushed back lightly. "I'm not looking for someone to take over. I need a partner who respects the product." He smiled, unbothered. "Of course, I'm not a cowboy. I'm operations. I make sure the train stays on the tracks while you decide where it's going." We talked for almost an hour. He spotted a flaw in one of my early scaling assumptions and suggested a fix that actually made sense. When he pulled out his laptop and sketched it in real time, I felt that familiar relief, the kind you feel when someone finally sees what you're trying to build. A few weeks later, I showed him our internal demo. He caught a race condition in the data pipeline within minutes, something my contractors had missed for months. He didn't gloat, just adjusted the logic, handed the laptop back. "There," he said, "run it now. It worked flawlessly." That was when I let myself imagine it. A real executive partner, someone who could handle the noise while I focused on the signal. We talked equity after that. 18% for him, standard vesting, my majority intact, a clean Delaware structure with a small board. All reasonable, all normal. The warning signs were small at first. A comment here, a decision framed as urgency there. The way he'd summarize my concerns to others with a soft laugh like I was overcomplicating things. "You get passionate," he told me once, not unkindly. "That's not a bad thing. We just have to balance it." I told myself that was partnership, that was leadership friction, that was the price of building something real with someone else. Sitting alone in my office now, staring at access logs that told a very different story, I realized how carefully he'd trained me to doubt my own instincts. The first real win came fast enough to make everything feel justified. A $780,000 contract with a regional hospital network that had been bleeding money every time their legacy systems hiccuped. We cut their incident response time by more than half in the first quarter, and referrals followed like dominoes. Our seed round closed at $3.2 million not long after, two solid funds, a valuation that finally let me exhale. Growth has a way of muting doubt. Every Slack notification felt like momentum. Every new hire felt like proof. He stepped into the COO role smoothly, like he'd been waiting for it. Morning stand-ups became tighter. Investor updates became slicker. He started handling more of the external conversations. "So you don't have to absorb all that noise," he said, smiling. "Trust me, the first invoice I flagged was small enough to ignore if you wanted to." A spike that didn't quite match usage, tucked into a line item most people never read. I rotated my screen toward him in my office, the table still sticky from someone's spilled cold brew. "This doesn't track," I said. "The workload didn't change." He barely glanced before leaning back against the doorframe. "Probably a reporting quirk. It's a 40% jump." He shrugged. "Easy. You're spinning on details again. We've got bigger fires, trust me." I let it go. I shouldn't have. A few weeks later, he promised a feature in a client meeting we hadn't discussed. I caught his eye across the conference table, felt my jaw tighten. "Guaranteed by Q3, he said. Confident, hands folded. "We're already ahead of it." Afterward, I stopped him in the hallway. The carpet smelled faintly of dust and toner. "We can't deliver that," I said quietly. "We'll figure it out." "I will figure it out," I corrected. He smiled like I was a kid interrupting. "This is how deals close. Don't be so emotional about it." That word landed harder than it should have. Emotional, like caring too much about whether what we sold actually worked, was a flaw. He started taking calls in private rooms, started forwarding fewer emails. When I asked about a revised projection deck I hadn't seen, he waved it off. "Just stress testing scenarios for investors. You don't need every version." At night, alone with my laptop, I'd replay conversations and tell myself I was overreacting, that this was just what scaling looked like, that as a Black woman leading a company under pressure, I was primed to see threat where there was only friction. Then came the board prep call where he summarized my concerns as founder nerves and suggested we move faster without overthinking governance. One of the investors chuckled. Another said, "Let's trust the ops side here." I felt something inside me go still. Even then, I told myself to wait, to gather clarity, to be reasonable. Sitting in my office now, access revoked, evidence stacking quietly on my screen, I understood the pattern I'd been refusing to name. He wasn't managing chaos. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, the city outside my window flickering between amber and black, and went back through everything I'd dismissed over the last 6 months. Every minor adjustment, every decision he'd insisted didn't need my sign-off. The more I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't a single betrayal, it was a sequence. I pulled raw exports from the system most executives never touched. The one that tracked how data moved, not just who had permission to see it. Metadata doesn't lie, but it also doesn't announce itself. You have to know what you're looking for. I always had. Files were being opened in clusters, copied in ways that mirrored diligence but skipped key internal checks. Access tokens rotated, then quietly restored. Not sloppy, confident, like someone who assumed no one else would ever audit this layer. My stomach dropped when I noticed the timing. The heaviest activity aligned with weeks he'd told me to step back and focus on vision. Weeks I'd been labeled too emotional to handle high-pressure negotiations. I cross-referenced the activity with our investor data room. Documents had been accessed, downloaded, and reintroduced under slightly altered names, small enough changes to dodge casual detection. A revised cap table appeared, one that shifted control under the guise of future governance optimization. My hands shook as I scrolled, the edge of the laptop biting into my palms. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasing me slowly enough that no one would notice until it was done. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt compressed, like the air had thickened. I thought about calling our outside counsel, then stopped. If I moved too early, he'd know, and if he knew, he'd clean this up better than I ever could. That's when I thought of Riley. She'd been with me in year one, a security engineer who understood our architecture as deeply as I did. She'd left for a forensics firm after a burnout spiral we both pretended not to see. We hadn't spoken in months, but her fingerprints were all over this system. If anyone could help me read between the lines, it was her. I opened Slack and stared at her name longer than I'd like to admit. Reaching out meant admitting how badly I'd misjudged someone I'd brought into my company. It meant saying out loud that the emotional founder might have been right all along. I typed anyway, deleted it, typed again. Need a friend, I finally sent. Not official. Are you around? The reply came faster than I expected. For you? Always. Bring coffee. This sounds bad. I closed my laptop and leaned back, exhaustion washing over me in a wave that left my eyes burning. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I wasn't ready to tell the board, but I was done doubting myself, because buried in those logs, deeper than the rest, was one entry I hadn't fully processed yet, one access path that didn't belong to any workflow we'd ever approved. Riley arrived just after sunset, hair pulled back, hoodie zipped, eyes already scanning the room like it was a crime scene. I handed her a mug of coffee that tasted like cardboard and watched her take a sip without complaint. "Okay," she said, setting it down. "Who fucked you over?" I laughed once, sharp and humorless, then pulled my laptop toward her. "I need you to tell me if I'm losing my mind." She didn't answer. She just leaned in, fingers already moving across the trackpad, the glow from the screen cutting hard lines across her face. The apartment smelled faintly of printer toner from the stack of documents I'd dragged home, like I was trying to build a bunker out of evidence. We worked for hours, no small talk. Just quiet curses under her breath as she traced patterns, pulled threads, followed trails I'd been too close to see cleanly. She pointed at the screen once, twice, then sat back. "He thinks this layer is invisible," she said. "Most people never look here." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "A mirror environment," she said. "He duplicated core materials, not to sabotage. To shop." The word hit me like a slap. Shop, my company, my work, being quietly packaged and pitched without me in the room. I called our outside counsel the next morning, pacing my office while the smell of someone's microwaved fish leaked in from the break room. I laid it out carefully, stuck to facts, waited for reassurance. There was a pause on the line. Then, "This is serious, but it's also delicate." "I have logs," I said, "metadata, access signatures, evidence or proof," she asked. "If you move too fast and he wipes the rest, you could lose everything. You need to be absolutely sure." I hung up feeling smaller than when I dialed. I tried a board member next, the one who'd always framed himself as founder-friendly. He listened, then sighed. "Alexis, this is a stressful moment," he said. "Series B pressure does things to people. Are you sure you're not reading intent into normal ops behavior?" My jaw clenched. He locked me out. "Temporarily," he said gently. "Let's wait for clarity." Clarity, like betrayal, announced itself politely. That night, my sister called, voice tight with concern. "You sound tired," she said. "Have you eaten?" I hadn't. I sat in my car afterward and cried, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, angry at myself for needing a minute when everything was on fire. Riley texted later. "They're stalling, means they're scared. Or they don't believe me," I wrote back. A moment passed. Then, both can be true. I stared at the dark ceiling of my apartment, the weight of it pressing down, and understood something with brutal clarity. The systems meant to protect me were designed to preserve calm, not justice. No one was coming to step in and save this for me. If I wanted the truth to matter, I was going to have to make it impossible to ignore. The decision didn't arrive like courage. It arrived like exhaustion, settling into my bones until there was only one thing left to do. I stood in the shower that morning, water beating against my shoulders, replaying the board call, the lawyer's careful distance, the way his voice had slid so easily into authority while mine was framed as panic. Justice or revenge? I didn't know yet. Survival felt like the more honest word. Riley came back that night with takeout and a legal pad already creased from use. We sat at my kitchen table, cardboard containers steaming between us, the room smelling like soy sauce and printer paper. "We don't confront him yet," she said. "We let him keep thinking he's invisible." "So we document," I said. "And we bait," she replied, eyes sharp. "He's already moving." We just give him room to move faster. For the next 2 weeks, I played my part. Morning greetings in the hallway, polite nods in meetings. I let him talk over me once, just enough to reinforce the narrative he'd been building. Inside, I was coiled so tight, my jaw ached from holding still. Riley set up a parallel logging environment, nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just a way to capture what he was already doing in higher resolution. We watched as he accessed materials he had no reason to touch, as he opened threads where he referred to me as distracted and overextended, as he shared polished versions of our story with people who weren't on our cap table. One message made my stomach turn. "She's emotional about control," he'd written. "I'm handling the real negotiations." That was when the anger sharpened into focus. We looped in HR quietly, flagged contract clauses he'd violated, sections I'd insisted on years ago and everyone else had skimmed. Riley mapped the timeline until it was airtight, every action nested inside the next like a trap, closing slowly. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I sat at my desk, lights off, city noise leaking through the windows, and wondered who I was becoming. I'd always believed transparency was strength. Now I was orchestrating silence, strategy, a reveal designed to end someone. Riley texted just before midnight. "Everything's ready," I typed back with hands that finally stopped shaking. "Tomorrow morning, the conference room would be full. The stakes would be public." And for the first time since this started, I wasn't afraid of what he might say. I was afraid of how calm I felt, knowing exactly what I was about to do. He was already there when I walked into the conference room, jacket draped over the chair like he'd claimed the space. Sunlight cut through the glass wall, catching dust in the air, the table faintly sticky under my fingertips. My heart thudded once, hard, then settled. "Calm, too calm. Morning," he said, "easy. Ready for the Series B sync?" "Before that," I said, pulling out my chair, "I need to ask you about something strange in the logs." He didn't sit, just leaned back, arms crossed. "Logs? Access activity," I said lightly. "Walk me through why core materials were mirrored last week." A flicker crossed his face, gone almost immediately. "Disaster recovery prep. Standard ops." "Standard," I echoed, clicking my laptop open. "Even when it bypasses internal review?" He shrugged. "You're reading into it." I turned the screen toward him. "This shows you opened investor decks after midnight, multiple times." He smiled tight. "I work late, you know that." "And exported them," I continued, "then reintroduced revised versions. That's collaboration," he said. "You've been stretched thin. I was helping." "By adjusting control assumptions?" I asked. "Without telling me?" His jaw set. "You're being emotional about governance again." There it was. I felt it land, then slide off. I clicked again. "This environment," I said quietly, "why does it exist?" He glanced, then laughed once. "You can't seriously think that. It's registered under a shell entity tied to your family," I said. "Explain that." Silence stretched. He straightened, color draining from his face. "That's coincidental." "Coincidental," I repeated. "Like this email?" I slid a printed page across the table. He scanned it, lips parting. "She's too distracted to notice," he read aloud, then looked up sharply. "That's out of context." "Which context makes it better?" I asked. He leaned forward now, voice low. "Alexis, listen, we're in the red zone." I was protecting the company. "From me?" I asked. "The founder? You are spiraling," he said. "Investors see that." The door opened behind him. Riley stepped in, phone already recording. "For the record," she said calmly, "you've been informed this conversation is documented." He spun. "You set me up." "No," I said, standing. "You set yourself up. I just kept the receipts." His phone buzzed. "Once." Again. He looked down as access alerts rolled in, one after another, his shoulders sagging with each vibration. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I already did," I said. "Your access is suspended. HR is on their way." He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his face collapsed. Not anger, not arrogance, calculation giving way to fear. And that was when I knew the fight was over, even if the fallout was just beginning. The suspension rippled outward faster than I expected. Within minutes, his calendar went dark. Slack messages bounced. The easy confidence he'd worn for months drained away as HR arrived. Faces tight, voices careful. He didn't argue then. He just kept staring at his phone like it might lie for him if he looked long enough. The board meeting that afternoon felt unreal, like walking into a room where the furniture had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. Same faces, same table, different gravity. I stood at the head with Riley beside me, my laptop connected to the screen, the air smelling faintly of dry erase marker and nerves. I didn't editorialize. I didn't raise my voice. I walked them through the timeline the way Riley and I had built it, access patterns, mirrored materials, unauthorized revisions. I showed them how the narrative about me being emotional had been seeded quietly, repeatedly, until it felt organic. I watched recognition dawn in real time. One investor rubbed his forehead, another stopped taking notes altogether. The vote was quick once the question started. Termination for cause. Immediate. Unanimous. Afterward, the hallway felt too quiet. Someone avoided my eyes. Someone else squeezed my arm and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The legal part stretched on for months, depositions that left my throat raw, invoices that made my stomach flip. Riley's timelines held under pressure. Every timestamp, every signature doing exactly what it was supposed to do. He stopped looking at me halfway through the second session, answering questions like the room was empty. Clients called, one by one, carefully worded concern. I told them the truth without theatrics, internal misuse, no data compromised. Safeguards strengthened. Most stayed. One even said, quietly, he always made me uneasy. Too smooth. By the time the Series B closed, 10-4 million, cleaner terms, clearer control, I felt hollowed out. Proud, maybe. Relieved, but changed in ways I hadn't fully named yet. I triple-checked everything now. Logs, access, people. The last I heard, he was consulting somewhere smaller. No equity, no title worth mentioning. The industry moved on the way it always does. Some nights, I still wake up with my heart racing, convinced I've missed something hidden in plain sight. Trauma doesn't disappear just because you win. But then, I remember standing in that conference room, steady for the first time in weeks, refusing to be diminished. And I breathe, because if you've ever been called too emotional while someone was quietly stealing what you built, you already know why I had to tell this. Knowing someone else understands, that's what kept me standing when everything else felt like it was falling apart.